We launched it at the very start of March, which was exactly the time, obviously, that everything went into chaos.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the EdTech podcast and this episode of the Voctech podcast, where we seek to explore the intersections of adult education and technology. A big shout out to Ufi Voctech Trust for supporting this series and vocational skills development in the UK through their investments and grants in vocational technology. This week's episode is all about some of the immediate responses to training through technology in the wake of COVID-19. You'll hear from professionals in both early years and further education settings on how they engaged learners and helped cascade workforce training both in England and Wales and in English and Welsh. A big shout out to this week's amazing guests, and don't forget to check out their work via our show notes at theedtechpodcast.com. And if you enjoyed this week's episode, make sure you save the date for the newly announced UFI Week of Voctech, which will be a programme of online events celebrating Voctech and its impact on vocational training and learning, a bit like the discussion in today's podcast. And this will be taking place between Monday the 2nd and Friday the 6th of November 2020. And you can find out more by following UFI Voctech social feeds across Twitter and LinkedIn. Let's get straight into this episode. Here we go. So, absolutely delighted. It's another sunny and sweaty day here in the southwest of England. And I'm really excited. I've got some excellent guests on today's podcast. So first off, we have Nia Broderick, who is the project coordinator at Colleges Wales. Nia, thank you so much for being on the EdTech podcast. And I just thought, to start with, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Hello, so thank you for having me on. So my name's Nia, and I've been working on a variety of different projects at Coleg Cymru or Colleges Wales for 3 years now this week. So I'm part of the development team, and we work to try and bring opportunities to students and the wider college community, for example, in sports, visits through Erasmus+, and with projects supporting students with additional learning needs. So during that time, I've had the opportunity to work on some really great projects, from language learning, mental health, travelling to different places in Europe, looking at vocational graduate tracking, and currently the UFI Voctech project.
Fantastic. How in Welsh? What's the pronunciation of
it? It's a Colegau Cymru.
Colegau Cymru. Okay. My granny was from Wales, so I really should do better on that. That represents all the FE colleges across Wales. Can you tell us a little bit about, the number of colleges you have and the types of learners as well?
So there are 13 further education colleges across Wales, and Coleg Cymru or Colleges Wales act as the collective voice, really, and represent and promote the interests of all of those colleges. So at any one time, there are approximately 120,000 learners studying at FE colleges in Wales. So it's a real range from people starting their MVQs right through to degrees in some colleges. So we really do have quite a wealth, really, of students from all ages and backgrounds.
Fantastic. And I know that along with the rest of the education sector, COVID must have had a huge impact. So I just wondered if you could tell us a little bit about the two projects that you kicked off in response to COVID, and also how you used both funding and technology to help engage and inspire students during that time as well.
So the UFI Project Funding, it was a direct response to the coronavirus pandemic. So it kind of arrived on top of everything else we were doing. But it was looking at ways to use technology to make education more accessible for students in the further education colleges, especially with everything that's going on at the moment. So we work closely with Pembrokeshire College in West Wales, and in particular a man called Jeff Elliott, who could see the problems and the challenges that the FE colleges had. And then we worked together to make sure that our project was beneficial for all of the colleges in Wales, not just the one college. So our UFI project was a two-part project. The first part looked at staff training. As you can remember, the move to digital learning was very, very fast. And, the sectors responded brilliantly in such difficult times. But the focus for us was not how to use the technology, but, how to keep students engaged and how to keep them actively involved in the lesson when they're being done digitally, which, in some cases is something that hasn't happened before. So there was a good focus with us on how best to use the tools on the different platforms and utilising them to make sure that students not were just passively watching, but taking part in the lessons.
Yep.
So it was kind of giving that confidence, I suppose, to lecturers who, are fantastic in their work day to day and they know exactly what they're doing. And then all of a sudden you're asking them to do it from home. So there's so much more to consider when you're trying to, you can't just teach a normal lesson plan. You've got to engage with people differently.
What kind of technology mediums did you use to help with that training? Was that sort of webinars or videos? How did you go about that?
So because we were working with every college in Wales, there's quite a lot of different platforms to consider, and every college has bought into their own choice platform, really. So we've got people on Google, people on Zoom, Big Blue Button. There was a whole range of different platforms that people were using day to day. So what we did was look at the features you could use. So if there was a whiteboard feature or a thumbs up or a hands up or a question box, how to best use those to make sure that students were taking part in the lesson. And, that you could see that they were still there and still responding and understanding what you were trying to convey to them, really. And I think that was one of the issues that we could have had if we'd have tried to go down the route of just the one platform, because, everybody has a preference in platform and, colleges have invested heavily in some of these platforms that they do use. So it wasn't really for us to say everybody onto this one because it's got these features. It was more, this is what's available out there. If they work on yours, this is how to make the best of them.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm writing a report at the moment on higher education in the state of Georgia, and they have a sort of centralised system, slight digression, centralised system, but they have 26 institutions, but then like a sort of centralised system level as well. And what becomes apparent after speaking to lots of these institutions is the importance of autonomy at the institution level, or in your case in the college level, but there's still great learnings to be shared across the system or across the colleges in your case as well.
Yes, no, definitely. And there are some that have come up beneficial for different reasons, but then people are creatures of habit as well, what they're comfortable with, especially when the technology is new. You don't want to give them too much to take on board as well by swapping between the platforms. I know we use Teams, but we also use Zoom. We use anything really that lets us do what we need to do. But because we correspond with every college in Wales, we need to be able to speak to them regardless of the platform they use.
And what's the kind of uptake of the kind of training that you've put out there and to help with your colleges as well?
So the idea was that every college had 4 to 5 spaces on the course. So we ran the same course 4 times. And we were very lucky with a lady called Jo from Lightbulb Moment. So they had kind of a ready-made programme that did look at this. And because everything happened so quickly, we wanted something we could put into place straight away rather than start to look at a course from the beginning. So we sat down with them and looked at the content and how to make it relevant for FE, in particular vocational subject areas as well, because some subject areas are slightly easier to change the format to digital, but some are a lot more practical. So there's things you need to be able to see and to look at, and to, a box of wires, you need to see what the mistakes are, not just writing essays and things. So she was great, and she sat down with us and made sure that all of the examples were things that they could use in their own lessons. So we had 4 sessions of those, the identical ones, with 60 staff trained, and then they're going to cascade then to their own staff in their own colleges, up to 10 people each. So I think they might do a few more than 10, to be honest, but the feedback's really good, because it was just something that gave them back a bit of control. So they've been updating the rest of the staff, I suppose, at the end of the summer term, which is just finished. And I know a lot have got more training sessions coming up in September now.
Fantastic. And what level of funding did you get, if you don't mind me asking, or that might be...
No, so we had, because we were working with every college in Wales, most of the projects were one college project, but because Colleges Wales or Coleg Cymru, we work with them all, we had the £25,000 funding then. So I've only mentioned the first part of the project. There's a bit more. So shall I tell you a bit more about...
Yes, I'd love to. I was trying to recall. So yeah, I'd love to hear about the second part.
There we go. So the first part was staff focused. And then the second part then, we wanted to keep the students engaged and give them something to keep that motivation ongoing. You know, they weren't in college. A lot of them should have been on placement or work experience hours where they really get a feel of what it's like to work in that industry or workplace. And, you know, that was something that they definitely would have missed. So we produced a series of webinars that we called Voc Talks, so a little bit of a play on the TED Talks. It was a total of 8 live webinars, and what we did was speak to former college students discussing their careers. So we asked for former college students who are now working in the fields that, you know, they studied for, because we just wanted to give students the opportunity to ask their own questions and hear those experiences from those who'd been exactly where they were and were, you know, making a successful career of it. We were definitely just inspired by the people that came forward. You know, you don't understand really how many different vocations come out of just the one college. And, you know, we heard from people from in their first few years of the career right through to people who travel the world and achieved more than they ever thought possible. So I just sat there being inspired for a week, to be honest. There was just so much good advice, and they were very passionate about passing on their knowledge to the current students, and that was lovely to see.
You know, I think a lot of people are a bit anxious about sort of going into the world of work during this time. So did they have any uplifting messages we can share?
Yeah, definitely. They spoke about a huge amount of things, to be honest, from, you know, the importance of volunteering, even if it's not in the subject area that you're studying for. You know, those transferable skills are actually really important regardless of the career you want to go into, right through to how important it is to turn up early for an interview. You know, they were saying, don't just turn up early, make sure they know you're early and you sit somewhere obvious where everybody knows you're early, not just the person at the reception desk. And, you know, how to sell yourself really, and make sure that, you know, you put the time into writing the CVs and things, and show that you've researched the company, and, you know, not just kind of a copy and paste from some of the other CVs that you might have written recently. But no, we're going to release the webinars as a series of YouTube videos.
Right.
So what we did was go through them and take the best kind of 15-20 minutes out of them. So they should be on YouTube by the time this comes out to the world. So, you know, if you want to take a look, they'll be on the Coleg Cymru YouTube page. So there'll be a total of 16 videos, 8 individual content videos, but 8 will be subtitled in Welsh and 8 will be subtitled in English then, depending on, you know, which one you'd rather watch it in.
So that's really interesting, because I know that a lot of edtech companies listening in will sort of know the experience of changing their content to a local context. So could you tell us a little bit more about how you went about doing that to sort of benefit the users that you have and the students that use your materials in a variety of languages as well?
Yeah, so you know, we're a bilingual country, and we in Coleg Cymru do things bilingually quite naturally. You know, that's the way we work. It's great to give people a language choice or a language option, so we try and keep that in mind when we go about producing anything like this. So especially with resources, and generally people who study in further education colleges might go on to study locally and work locally, so, you know, it keeps the language in the area as well. So I think it's really important to include the language options from the beginning. You know, it's not something you can tuck in right at the end. You need to kind of plan it from the beginning. rather than an afterthought. So even things like when we were looking for speakers for our Voc talks, one of the first questions we asked them was, would you prefer to speak in Welsh or in English? And some said, oh, we'd prefer to speak in Welsh. So, that's the language they use day to day in the workplace, and the natural language for them to relax and actually speak to us about that experience, really. So it's not really translating, sometimes people think, from English into Welsh or English into any other language. You can have really good, rich content in languages like Welsh. And then we had a simultaneous translator in those sessions then, which translated things to English. So we found that, technology and working with languages is so much easier in some ways than doing it. We've all been in a conference and you can put your hand up and have the little headphones to listen to things bilingually. But with bilingual webinars, the translator has kind of an audio feed, and you can switch back and forth between them. If you're learning a language or you're not quite sure if you're going to be able to cope with, how fast they're speaking sometimes, you can just switch back and forth, and that gives you another language option then, I suppose, because, it's, from a financial point of view for us, it is cheaper because you don't rent the equipment either, and there's no transport and travel for translators. But we have definitely found that technology, and especially minority languages, it just opens the door.
So, final couple of questions, and then we'll move on to our guests from Pacey as well. But so you talked about two projects. Partly they were, the catalyst behind them was sort of COVID and adapting. And I just wondered whether you can kind of see across the college whether some of these activities have led to a sort of longer term thinking around continuing some of these activities sort of beyond the pandemic, whenever it hopefully comes to an end as well.
I think we've definitely found, that there's more than one way of working, and possibly we'd become used to the way we did things, and this kind of threw us into having to work with new systems and new ways of working and communicating with people, and it's partly been very good, to be honest. On other projects, I work with an Equivet project as well, and we're having meetings with people from the Netherlands and from Austria without leaving your house. They're really rich conversations, although there is something to be said about visiting somewhere and seeing for yourself the general feel of the place, I suppose. We've been very productive and we've been very busy, really, throughout this time, because a lot has carried on as normal. I think we're definitely looking at different ways of doing things, especially, with part of this project, there's a little bit more to come as well. So with the staff training, we're actually doing a little bit more in September. And because of the way the webinars worked and the way the students could ask their own questions and have a live response, I suppose, we're actually looking at doing something similar with the lecturing staff and the staff in the college, for them to be able to discuss nationally how they're responding to this, what they've tried and maybe worked really well or maybe didn't quite work so well. So we're definitely becoming more confident with the technology and quite enjoying trying it out, I suppose, because you can't do anything else at the moment.
No, and I loved your point earlier that, it's not about having one technology. I think, it's very natural for us to select different tools and services at different times, depending on, what we're trying to achieve. So I like that point. And then we had one final question, but you may have covered it, to be honest, in your last comments. But that was just, if you had any other recommendations to people who might be setting out on a similar kind of project, especially as we're sort of looking forward even to September and everything kicking off again. Whether you had any recommendations for others who are thinking about how to sort of upskill their staff or keep their students engaged if, there are local lockdowns and we're sort of back to a similar situation as we were in the spring.
I think the first part, to be fair, we were very, very lucky with Lightbulb Moment and the way they not took over, but they had the expertise and the pedagogy of why you do things and for how long. And it, everybody will have a go at seeing what works, but having it given to you and the reasons behind it just made that difference of giving people the confidence of, right, this is what I'm doing and this is why I'm doing it. So that's definitely something that had really good feedback. But then with the second part of the project, I suppose that was newer to us, really, finding speakers. To begin with, we were worried we wouldn't have enough, but then we were very lucky. But it's not, lucky is not the real word, really, because people were out of work because of coronavirus. Yep. One of the actors we spoke to was due to be out filming in New York, but he was at home and available to speak to us. So, there's so many good people out there who want to give their experiences and share their experiences with the young learners now. We actually had too many people eager to speak by the end. And, if you've got good facilitators, we were really lucky with two young people, Holly and Gabe from Pembrokeshire College. They led us through the week, and seeing their confidence grow throughout the week was great. By the Wednesday afternoon, we actually lost a speaker for 3 minutes, but they just carried on. Mm-hmm. And, maybe on the Monday morning that couldn't really have happened so smoothly. But I think maybe be realistic with timings. The summer, people are on holidays, and, we did a lot of this in-house. So, breaking things down into tasks and being realistic about how much time they take, especially things that are new to us. We hadn't really used many webinar softwares or subtitling softwares before, and trying those out, because neither of the ones we've used in the end were the ones we trialed to begin with. So, make sure that they work on more than one browser, or that the autosave button actually does autosave, and just little things like that. It just gives you the confidence to know that what you're doing is actually going to work and come out as something hopefully you can use for the future. And plan your language from the beginning, and it'll make it richer. It won't just be another thing to add to your list. Giving people that language choice is something that it's completely normal, really, isn't it? So it's nice to be able to do that for them.
Absolutely. And I think if one thing's come out of this, and thinking about anything that we can take in a positive, I like the idea that we're sort of allowing ourselves to be less perfectionist. And if people can interrupt a BBC broadcast on the news, or if technology cuts out for 3 minutes, but it ultimately it allows us to connect with these experts and people across the world, then that's great. And it is a learning curve and trying things. So loved lots of your comments there, so thank you very much. And I might ask you at the end some of your favorite subtitling technologies that you looked at, because I know that lots of people will be looking at that, but we'll come back to that. So thanks so much, Nia. And I know that we've had Annabelle and Claire patiently listening in.
Hello. Afternoon.
So for everyone listening in, you're in a slightly different educational context. Could you tell us a little bit about yourselves and who you are and what you do as well?
So I'm Annabelle Hardy-King. I am a project manager for PACEY. PACEY is the Professional Association for Childcare in Early Years, and we're a long-standing charity dedicated to supporting everyone working in childcare in early years to help them to provide high-quality care and early learning for children and families.
Thank you for the invitation to join. So, like Annabelle says, I'm Claire Prothero. I'm the National Manager for Wales for PACEY Cymru, and I lead and manage the work of PACEY within Wales. Our work here is supported by funding from the Welsh Government, so we work very closely with our Culham partners through a consortium approach of the main childcare and play organisations in Wales. And just a bit of my background, I've worked for PACEY or previously NCMA as we were, for just over 10 years, and I was previously a childminder myself.
Fantastic. Well, here's to all the childminders, because I've been pulling my hair out a little bit recently, and I think, Annabelle and I had a bit of a chat about this, but there's a whole nother conversation to be had about valuing our educators, and especially in the childcare sector. But I shall move on. So I've got here, early years in the childcare sector has undergone severe strain during COVID-19. Can you tell us some of the scenarios that professionals in the early years are having to deal with? and I'm sure this is an ongoing thing, but
absolutely, yeah. I mean, you can't believe it's only been sort of this year that this has happened, because it feels like this has been going on for a really long time. I mean, it's a completely unparalleled situation, isn't it, for everybody, but for those specifically working in childcare and early years, it has just been unprecedented. I mean, if we think back to March in England, and as you said, slightly different timings in Wales to a certain extent, but actually all sort of the same situation, to be told you need to close your business, say goodbye to those children and families that you've been dealing with. I mean, it's a heartbreaking situation from start to finish, taking into account that the vast majority are either self-employed or employing assistants. You know, actually, from a financial perspective, it has been devastating as well. So, you know, the government was able to offer some support. It obviously wasn't the case for everybody, and it's not going to capture all anyway. But from that vulnerability of the self-employed, and also for those employing assistants with the furlough situation, it's just been complex. And I think that's one of the things where Pacey has really come into its own, about being able to translate the support that's come out from the governments and being able to put it into language that practitioners can understand, for us to be able to support them in any way that we can. We know that it's been very well received in an absolutely terrible situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I'd agree with Annabelle. It's been a really, really challenging time for the sector. And I think one of the things that's come out of it as a sort of positive is how quickly settings can adapt and had to adapt to meet those challenges. And I think, in line with the sort of the work that you're doing, one of the challenges that they had to face very quickly was adapting the way they work digitally. So we've been working as Pacey for a number of years to bring people along on a sort of a journey of change towards using more digital means, and this has supported a sort of a swifter journey, I would say, in settings having to move quickly to utilize digital means, for example, emails and virtual meetings, and looking at online training and support much more than they ever did before.
And if I understand correctly, you were, as part of that digital journey, you were already looking at developing an app to deliver some of that bite-sized CPD, and then COVID hit, and with the assistance of some funding, that sort of pivoted towards, the immediate need to support childcare settings with dealing with the new guidance around COVID. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So we've been working with UFI for 18 months now, which has absolutely flown. And originally we were going to develop what's now called EY Smart, to help practitioners with the changes that were coming in regulation and curriculum in both England and Wales. Regulation changes in England came in, we developed courses about that, and actually that went down very, very well with a lot of practitioners. We launched it at the very start of March, which was exactly the time, obviously, that everything went into chaos. So we realised sort of quite early on that while the regulation side is important, actually what the practitioners needed at that point was support with how they could work with children in a completely different way, thinking about the challenges that were going to be faced when they could work again, as we started to come out of lockdown, thinking about those practitioners that were working with key worker children, and actually all of the different challenges that presents itself. So we spoke with UFI and actually agreed the pivot, and were able to very, very quickly develop content which was very well received. So I mean, we've done to do with a focus on bereavement, through to hand washing, and the real sort of the making it fun for children. And I think this is something that kind of comes back to what Nia was just talking about, where bringing that sort of experience of practitioners that have been doing things for a long time into the sort of the forefront. Because if you were a childminder working on your own, actually being able to be a fly on the wall at seeing how somebody else is working is really important. So we took that point and we went and filmed sort of real settings, if you like, before lockdown happened, obviously. And actually we were able to look at the clips that we've got and use some of them to develop these courses as well. So actually the reaction we've had to that has been superb.
And yeah, let's talk a little bit about the reaction, because when we spoke before this recording, you were saying, what an influx of sign-ups you've had since March. So if I understand correctly, the PACEY membership is around 25,000, and you've had sort of 20,000 sign-ups to the training app since March, with half of those actually being new to the organisation. So, I mean, for people listening in that are thinking about, communicating with their own learners or their own workforce as well, have you got any advice on how you went about that and sort of, how you've got to that number so quickly?
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a double-edged sword, because obviously as we launched, any launch marketing or anything like that we were planning on doing was completely, no press outlets or trade press or anything like that was going to want to pick this up, because actually we were needing to deal with the pandemic situation. So we had a really good positive initial impact on sort of the core readership that we had, but actually what's really made it effective was the pivot to the project to help with the COVID pandemic. And we've been we speak to trade outlets, we've got trade press, leaflets, the full marketing suite, I would say, but also seeing the value from, government organisations and things like that, and being able to offer a tool that practitioners are able to continue to develop in this situation, because it's, something that they can do wherever they are on any device. And it's sort of what we were finding up front is that there was a real sort of feeling among the sector of the people that we'd spoken to, that they weren't as digitally savvy as they could be. And it's interesting because actually we were finding, as we got more into that detail, that they were more digitally savvy than they were giving themselves credit for. They were on social media, they were online banking, they were shopping and things like that. But actually what they've seen from using UI Smart is that it's easy, and actually it's given them more confidence. And I think that also comes back to what Nia was saying. We've held Facebook Live sessions, we've held webinars, we've been working with a practitioner panel of people so that we can make sure that the training is as relevant as it possibly could be. And I think that side of it, word of mouth, because of that, has really, really helped us. But I think advertising on social media and that side of things has really, really helped us.
That's really interesting. I've heard of digital transformation before, that the only communication strategy that you should have is to over communicate. And it sounds like with both of the projects that's really key, is just to keep offering up ways of assisting your learners, or your team. And just to go back, so we've got Claire also on the recording as well, the National Manager for Wales for PACEY. And Claire, I just wondered, obviously working across England and Wales, and listening into Nia's conversation before, how you also sort of manage the differences in national legislation or frameworks and guidance, and obviously we're dealing in an extremely fast moving situation, so how you made sure that everything was kind of useful in a local context as well.
Yeah, so like as Nia was saying, really, Wales is a bilingual country, and it's there at the forefront of everything that we do. It's really, really important for us at PACEY to ensure that we support those working in Wales, not just with Welsh relevant content, but Wales relevant information and advice and guidance and training and everything through to publication. So we have a Welsh language policy as PACEY, but we need to obviously ensure that it's not just about having a policy to tick a box, but it's embedded in our approach and our ethos in all the work that we do. So, for example, our team in Wales, we're a very small team, there's only 8 of us, but across the team we're all highly committed and very, very passionate, both about sort of Welsh language, but also that Wales context as well. We're all either Welsh speakers or Welsh learners, so it's right through us, almost like a sort of stick of rock, I would say. We obviously, we're like I said earlier, we're supported by funding from the Welsh government. So we need to ensure there that we're supporting those strategies that are coming out from Welsh Government as well around, for example, Cymraeg 2050, aiming to have a million Welsh speakers by the year 2050. So for us, it's not just simply about having a Welsh language version of any courses or any materials that we produce, but the fact is that childcare and education specifically are devolved powers of Welsh Government, and the legislation and the frameworks and the guidance can look and feel very different here. Mm-hmm. It's not. People quite often think that you can just make a very easy equivalency match and think, well, they have the EYFS framework in England, so that'll be the equivalent for the foundation phase framework for early years here. But it's not the way that it works. We have dual split regulation between Care Inspectorate Wales, for example, for childcare here, and Estyn for education, whereas in England, Ofsted does the job of sort of both almost combined. So for us, it's about having that expertise and that knowledge embedded into our work and working really, really closely with our colleagues in head office to ensure that happens at those very, very early stages of development, rather than the Wales work being a bolt-on or an afterthought almost. And I think we're getting really, really good at that as an organisation. And that then significantly impacts on what we're able to offer to providers and to members as well, because they benefit then from having quality and relevant and accessible content and information, and the trust that comes from that being a reliable source as well.
Absolutely. And in the same way that I asked Nia around, COVID being a catalyst to some of these changes, what do you see as the impact of, the big take-up of this application, and also what you might do with it going forward from sort of 2020 and beyond? So how would you like to utilise the technology that's been set up and the interest and carry that forward?
Yeah, I think we've just got this real captive audience now, which is really exciting. It's an audience that we don't necessarily always talk to, as you were saying. Over half aren't PACE members. In fact, I ran the stats this morning, and I think it's almost 60% aren't, which is even more exciting. So one of the things that we're really working with those users on is when they complete a course, they're able to fill out like a reflection document, which means that they are thinking about what they've learned and what that impact is going to have on their practice, and therefore how that's going to impact the children that are in their care. So we had a Facebook Live last night, in fact, about our hashtag, which is do one thing. So each one of the courses has got that. So we're really working with those learners to see how the learning is impacting them and what they're going to go back and do differently. And then we'll revisit them as well and see how that has worked out. So from an evaluation perspective. But what's really, really exciting for PACE is that we've also received some additional funding from the Department for Education and the Treasury, and we're going to be working with some new partners, Loughborough University, ICANN, Relate and NDNA, and actually really develop that content further. So they've seen what we can do with EY Smart, and we're now able to really expand it further. And then sort of on top of that, when the changes in curriculum do come for England and Wales, we'll layer those on, which is obviously what the original project was going to be. So we're just going to keep building on it. We think it's such an important thing, and also the reaction of practitioners who don't need to take a day out of their working week and go and spend money on an expensive course or a huge textbook. They can do it in short, sharp ways and just changing the way that they learn.
Yeah, I love that. I love from both the projects hearing about, bite-sized implementation. And I was listening back to one of our other recordings at lunchtime, and the idea that overnight successes are 10 years in the making, and this idea of to just do one thing and, start small, also offer your learners sort of bite-sized content is great. So final question to both of you, because I've been very greedy with the time I've taken from your day. COVID's been a terrible thing in both of our countries, and I just wondered, if you were to sort of think about some of the moments over the last weeks and months that we can carry forward as a sort of positive influence, whether you have any that you'd like to share with our listeners as well.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. I think I've got a couple. I think when we were on very, very short notice, asked to all work from home and to still support our members and also support each other in the same way that we would as if we were in the office. I'm so proud of the Pacey team and how we actually did that with very, very little hiccups. And back to what Nia was saying, whatever means necessary from a digital perspective, things carried on. And I think that shift in working is something to be really, really proud of. I think also we've worked throughout with practitioners. So as I was saying, we've had a panel where we've had input throughout, and actually for them to still be happy to engage with us and to see the value of how they are engaging with us with everything else they've had going on has just been fabulous. So I thank them as well.
And I would agree with Annabelle, in those very, very early days, the shock of it all and almost the way we had to be very, very reactive in the support that we gave. But as time moved on and we quickly moved into the sort of new way of working, we were able to work a lot more proactively and to start to plan very, very quickly what was going to be needed and what support was needed. So it then had the sort of a stronger impact, I think, as well on people looking for support as time moved on.
Well, that sort of spirit of generosity that Annabelle mentioned, I sort of see that in all the guests that have joined us today. So thank you all for giving up your time today. And for anyone listening in, all of the work that's been mentioned today, we'll be sharing links to that on our show notes as usual. But yeah, I think that brings us to the end. So thank you so much for sharing your work. Best of luck with the rest of 2020 and have a great afternoon as well.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Sophie.
That's all for this episode. Thanks for listening in, everyone. If you like this episode, please rate and review wherever you get your podcast from. For upcoming events, competitions, funding and more, sign up to our newsletter. And our next Voctech episode will be drawing together investors from around the world who are funding vocational technology and workplace innovations. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, do make sure you're subscribed. But before all that, take care. Bye-bye.